Hello, Lakeview family. We're doing something a little different. For the next few weeks, we're going to do some weekly videos talking about the Apostles' Creed. So last Sunday, we started again reciting the Creed in our services. Last year, we did it for a long stretch. And part of that is intentional. It is coming together, as we talk about in worship on Sundays, to worship God, to be drawn in to that time of worship, and also to communicate the things that we believe, to repeat amongst ourselves as a community the things that we say are true, that we believe to be true about us as Christians. So we wanted to do a video. Rachelle had this great idea out of one of the classes that she took last spring on the Apostles' Creed, and was like, hey, let's do a video. We'll reintroduce the Apostles' Creed in our services and maybe talk more about it. And that grew to this video series and also our Wednesday night Creeds and Crisps. I'm very excited. So we're just going to jump in, have kind of some short videos each week to talk about one or two phrases from the Creed that we're focusing on that week. This week there's two, and then just kind of a general intro, so it might be a little bit longer. But on that note, Rachelle, maybe just give kind of a brief overview of why creeds are important, why it would be something that we would talk about, and maybe some history of where it came from.
Yeah. So the Apostles' Creed, there's been different myths and legends about how it was started, and some of them saying that each apostle, each of the 12 apostles, was given a line from the Creed as they went out to spread the gospel. And that legend kind of lingered until around the 1400s. But the original Apostles' Creed was written in about the 2nd century, and there are various creeds. The Nicene Creed is actually the one we said for a long time here at Lakeview, and the Apostles' Creed was very popular with the Western Church, and the Nicene Creed and some of the other creeds came more out of the Eastern Church, and they're very similar now. They've both been tweaked to kind of nothing new or outrageous has been added, but just they're very similar. Apostles' Creed's a little shorter. But it just goes back to that 2nd century, the early Christians, and the main purpose of it was actually to teach against some false doctrines that were popular at that time. So now we come together and we say it as beliefs of the church for almost 2,000 years now, and we can join together in our statement of faith, and that we are all saying these things together. It's not our own personal statement of faith, but a statement of faith of the church, and a belief in the church and the things that the church has believed for 2,000 years. But it was originally written mostly to address some false doctrines, to make sure that the early Christians were staying on track with what was important to believe about Christ and about God.
Yep. And I think something probably I don't know that we always do a lot of that. I think just as a pastor, how I was trained, there wasn't necessarily conversations about, caring for and being kind of stewards over people's theology and what they believe kind of corporately. And we think about all the different denominations and people's perspectives, and that can spread in some ways pretty vast. And I think one of the things I love about drawing our focus around kind of some central doctrines is that it reminds us of what is key. Like Apostles' Creed especially focuses a lot on Jesus, because at the time, as you said, that was one of the things they were combating, was heresies around Jesus, his divinity, kind of the understanding of the Godhead sort of stuff. So I like it because it gives us something to focus on. It reminds us of kind of the central things that we believe. And when we talk about being disciples and making disciples, it helps us answer that question, or begin to answer the question, well, what does that even mean? And there's things we can point to. One of the things that we've talked about that I think is a little bit of a tweak is the we versus I. Maybe hit on what you studied with that, and one of the kind of why we like to use we language in our context.
Yeah. We want to be saying it as a church and not just our individual personal statement of faith. So we're coming together corporately. We are stating that this is the beliefs of not just this church, Lakeview, on Sunday,
right,
and the people that are here, but the church universal around the church and around the whole world, and going back almost 2,000 years. So instead of it just being I believe, we are joining together, saying it together. And
I think something that we don't often maybe think about is, as Western, specifically Americans, we have a very individualized kind of culture, and there's a lot of kind of focus on me and kind of my way. Certainly in our state, and I love our state, we're kind of a lot on individual freedom, which there's points and purpose for that. But when we think about that in the context of the gospel and of the church and the faith and the church that Christ came and the kingdom that he ushered in, that individualism kind of not is in tension with, but really rubs against that. So part of it is when we say we, and one of the things that I like about it and appreciate that we do here is that we're reminding ourselves that we're not on an island. You know, as we've talked a lot about being disciples, making disciples, you know, we're talking about what it means this last Sunday to be, you know, and to be a part of the love of Christ and to abide in Christ simply for who we are, not because of what we do. I think it gets at those kinds of things, is we're a part of something that's much bigger than ourselves. And connecting, like you said, back to the 2nd century, right, when they were penning these words and when they meant something very different, because in their context, to hold to these things and to say these things was going against Rome and was saying things that really were politically charged that then could result in death. Yeah. You know, so it really meant something. And especially when you think about discipleship or baptismal preparation in that context, it took like years. Mm-hmm. And so this big, long process, and part of that was because of what it really meant that you were saying, you know, that you're not giving your allegiance fully to Caesar, but to some other god. So it's very, very important. So first couple lines that we're going to look at.
Right.
Hit us with it, Rachelle.
Yes. The first one, we believe in God the Father. The first thing to think about, we say throughout this, we believe, which we talked about, the we aspect of it, but when we say we believe, there's different things when we say we believe, you know. What do you think is going to happen when the Chiefs and the Jaguars play? Well, I believe that the Chiefs are probably going to win, or whatever. Like, I believe that. I believe, and it's even different from saying we believe that God is the Father. We're saying we believe in God the Father. So it's a trust that we are putting in. So all these things throughout this, we are trusting when we say we believe. We believe God the Father. It's not just we think that or we believe that. Yeah. He is
it's not just an opinion or a perspective, but it is a belief that, again, we're pledging our allegiance to, and we're placing trust. Yeah. You know, which then, by saying it in that way, actually adds more meat to that statement of belief, because that all of those things hang off that we believe in God the Father. Yeah. Yes.
And you know, as you mentioned, it was some of this was subversive against the Roman Empire, and that this is one line that it was because at that time, well, let's go back a little bit to Jesus' time when he talked about the Father. The Father in the Jewish culture was a loving and caring figure, but by the time we get to second century Rome, the Father is this distant, powerful figure. Right. So it meant a different thing even then than it did just a couple hundred years before, or 100 years before, and different from now when we talk about Father. Right. So it was a very powerful figure, distant, and that was subversive to say I believe in that Father and not in the Roman Empire, and not in. So that was, but now we can still take it in our culture now that we're talking about a loving and caring God, and sometimes that can be hard because we have people who don't have loving and caring fathers. Right. So rather than looking at it as God the Father is loving and caring like earthly fathers, we can flip that around. Loving fathers should be loving and caring like God, because we do view God the Father as loving and caring.
That's good.
We believe in him. So the next line, Almighty, maker of heaven and earth.
Yes. And Almighty, that's a big word.
That is a big word. And I thought it was interesting that it's separated, at least by this author. Right. We believe in God the Father, and then Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Not God the Father Almighty, but the Almighty is connected to maker of heaven and earth. And I think it gets to the meaning behind it, because the Greek word that is translated here as Almighty was all powerful, and it wasn't just that God is powerful, but he's powerful in all things. In all things. Got it. And we have the next line, the maker of heaven and earth, being representing all things, both material and spiritual. Yeah. And so one of the false teachings at the time, this guy Marcion, who's a Gnostic, and he was teaching that there's a difference, that God was not in the material world, only in the spiritual world. So even to the point that God the Creator was not actually God the Father, but another lesser God that created against the Father's will, almost. And we as humans are stuck in human bodies, that just need to be free of the human bodies so that God can work.
Right.
So very extreme beliefs, but we're becoming prevalent.
Right.
And so this phrase that God is all powerful, He's powerful in all things, both in heaven and on earth.
Right.
And so the spiritual and the material.
Right. And working in all things at all times, which we would say and hold true even today. But we can also see in some ways, I've heard the line people say, you can be so heavenly minded that you're of no earthly good. Because there can be this sense, especially when we think about end times and all those kinds of things, that we just need to leave and flee this place and that it's going to be wiped out, not recognizing that God in His all-powerful nature both created and continues to work in to redeem all things and to make all things new. And so I think that's a pretty strong statement that is good to reinforce, recognizing the power of God to be at work in all things. And even today. And I think that gets to, as you've mentioned before, and I know is in your notes, even how we think about creation, how we care for the world, which can be kind of a hot topic button, but really just gets to the point of these are things that God created, and then as stewards, recognizing how do we come alongside and care for, and also in ways work to co-create with God, recognizing that God works in and through us, His people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's an important part of it, and recognizing that God cares about more than just souls.
Right.
That He does care about the physical things people are going through. He cares, and that we should care about those things too. And that His plan of salvation is for all of that, and not just for souls, which are important.
Well, I think if you just overlay that with looking at and observing how Jesus worked and lived in the world, you see that.
Yeah.
You see Jesus caring for the physical, the way He felt, the way that He pursued people, obviously healing, raising the dead, all those things are in the physical, and Jesus cared about those as God on this earth in the flesh. So that makes sense.
Right.
All right. Well, first two lines, we'll chat more Wednesday night. If you are able to come, we would love to have you a part of the conversation, asking questions. Maybe you've read books or thought about the Creed and have some thoughts or perspectives. We would love to hear it. So we'll keep doing these videos. We'll keep reciting the Creed on Sundays together. And we will see you either Wednesday or Sunday or online or somewhere.
Somewhere.
Blessings.